So thank you all for coming. I'm Katie Paciga, and Christina and I are really excited to share this work. Our book, Guided Drawing with Multilingual College Press in 2023. It is anchored in a lifetime of experience in early childhood classrooms and a passion for children who are multilingual learners. Part of what guides our work is this quote from Elizabeth Coates: young children almost always talk to themselves all the time they are drawing. It is not often, however, that adults pay attention to the content of this talk, and that's really where the meat from this book came from. It was from watching children as they were drawing and wrestling with content area and new language associated with their learning in their early childhood contexts. Today during our webinar, we hope to share our research foundation for guided drawing to give you a full framework for what is guided drawing, why do we do it. We hope to invite you to consider strategies for integrating guided drawing into your practice or research. We'll analyze some examples and talk about instructional moves within the guided drawing context, and we will consider some linguistically and sustaining practices for multilinguals. Christina, I think this one's yours.
This is me. Okay. So one of the important distinctions about guided drawing is it's very content focused. When we think about children drawing in like an art area or a writing or drawing center, oftentimes there's drawing related talk, but there's also other kinds of talks. They might be, chatting about something that happened in the playground or at home while they're drawing. But guided drawing is a scaffolded approach that we use to teach content related concepts and vocabulary. And it's paired with language-rich explanations and children's drawings. It's typically part of a science unit that identifies these concepts and vocabulary that are engaging and relevant to children. We'll talk today about insects, spiders, plants, and frogs. We are in the process of finishing up our building unit, so our first social science unit. Guided drawing pairs these direct learning experiences, hands-on experiences that we know can build content and vocabulary knowledge in children, as well as concrete materials like multimedia, lots of learning conversations, and it incorporates these pre-planned explanations on understanding complex science-related concepts and vocabulary, but also how to break down the drawing so children can successfully represent what they're learning while in a guided drawing context. Throughout the process, there's lots of feedback. Oh, not yet, Katie.
Oh, sorry.
Lots of feedback. If children's misunderstandings emerge, we focus on that. But another really important part is we elicit talk and sharing opportunities, but we elicit content talk during the guided drawing process to help children develop expressive understandings of the target concepts. Next slide, please. So to initiate guided drawing, we invite 1 to 5 children to participate. What we've found is that the smaller group sizes work really well early on when we're introducing new content and vocabulary, and the larger sizes become more appropriate as the content's a little bit more familiar and children are able to do some of the drawings with a little less support. We explain to the children that what we're drawing and make those explicit connections between the directed learning activities and the guided drawing activity. For example, if we've recently sprouted some bulbs in clear plastic cups, we're going to let children know that we are drawing that process of sprouting, and we'll have all those materials. We'll have the sprouted bulbs, the bulbs that weren't sprouted, like all of that in front of us, so they can see the direct connection between what they're drawing and what they've been learning. We model the drawing step by step using and explaining those pre-planned explanations, using explicit vocabulary and concepts, constantly thinking about building and extending children's knowledge as we go. And throughout the process, we're eliciting talk related to the drawing, asking children to label parts of the drawing, explain their thinking, and so on. As noted previously, we'll clarify misunderstandings and confusions as they arise and offer that language practice as children share their drawings with others. Next slide. So why guided drawing? I mean, one of the things that we thought was really important was the way it combines a lot of research-based language building processes along with building conceptual knowledge about interesting, engaging, and relevant topics with children. The other piece that's really powerful for us is we noticed it was allowing our preschoolers, particularly our multilinguals, an opportunity to show what they understood, even when they didn't have the language knowledge to fully explain or the content knowledge to fully explain what they were showing us on paper. It encourages lots of rich and intentional interactions. There's lots of talk during guided drawing, and it fits within a number of, it fits within social, cultural, multimodal, and developmentally appropriate frameworks. Next slide. And then just quickly, why science? High interest and high utility. Science is everywhere. We know from research that preschoolers come into preschool with some science knowledge, and intentional learning interactions can build on that knowledge. It's multimodal, lots of seeing, listening, moving around, tasting, touching, and so on. We know from research that using science process talk and explanation supports children's uptake and use of that language. And we also know that differences in science achievement are evident as early as kindergarten, and those different interactions they have with science early on can make a difference because the gap in science knowledge persists throughout elementary grades. Next slide. Guided drawing, we describe it as purposeful, planful, and thoughtful. I don't know about all of you, but I was trained in sort of this activity-based approach, right? That like I'd get the mailbox magazine or I'd want to do these activities and I'd sort of back into the concepts from what I wanted to do. Guided drawing begins with really reflecting on who are my learners and what processes, concepts, and vocabulary should they learn and why. One of the things we talk about in the books are the different settings that Katie and I taught in. I was in a much more rural setting that had a pond in my schoolyard, and Katie was in a much more urban setting. And so we really reflected on who are our children, what relevant content are they coming in contact with every day, and how can we build on that knowledge so they better understand the world around them. Guided drawing is very planful. We really, and you'll see in the examples that follow, connect the direct learning experiences to what we want children to learn. We're very concrete, very explicit about how we want them to learn it. And we think about how guided drawing will be used to anchor and extend the learning. And lastly, it's very thoughtful because we're constantly thinking about what are my learners saying, doing, or producing to show that they're learning, and what teaching or instructional moves should I take to really ensure that they are continuing to learn. So here's an example from the text. We do begin with our focal questions. What do caterpillars need to grow and thrive, to grow and change, and then also how do caterpillars and butterflies survive and thrive. And from there, we thought about, okay, for the first focal question, how do caterpillars grow and change? What are the specific understandings children have to have in order to be able to answer that question? So we broke it down by, female butterflies lay eggs and so on. And then from there, we brainstormed vocabulary. First, the high utility science words, observe, life cycle, migrate, like camouflage, poison, the kinds of words that they will see in science over and over again throughout their elementary careers. We thought about the topic-specific words, butterfly, silk, frass, and so on. And then we brainstormed semantically related words. And these are the words that are best taught together. So egg, caterpillar, chrysalis made sense to teach together rather than separately. The next step was then we crafted some really explicit explanations about how we would explain each of those words to children and how they would be used in the drawing process. And we also planned out how, we matched each of the content-specific vocabulary words to a specific instructional routine. So head, thorax, and abdomen, 3 semantically related words. We thought about the ways we might teach that. And then we also thought about how the guided drawing process would really help children learn those terms. One of the things you'll notice, this is high-level vocabulary, and Katie will talk about the research study in a moment. When we first started piloting this, we really tried to choose words we didn't anticipate our preschoolers would come in contact with in other contexts. And then as we went on, we realized, wow, they are actually learning these complex vocabulary words and using them in very meaningful and authentic ways. And so we kept that sort of high level as our work continued. The other thing just to note is that lots of our vocabulary words are paired with gestures. So if you see Katie and I moving in certain ways, it's just because it's in our brains that way. So when we talked about antennas, we like 2 antennas up on top to help insects feel, and compound eyes are 2 compound eyes to see all around. So just to explain a little bit, if you see us moving, that's why. Okay.
So the research that we're going to share will support the argumentation that we make in the book and the supporting research that we've published, that guided drawing is a highly effective mechanism for supporting multilingual vocabulary growth and linguistic development, specifically around content area vocabularies. The research that we're showing emerged, we documented the first sort of phenomenon in a pilot study that preceded a formal research project. And then after the research project, we continued to engage in coaching and supporting in a couple of different contexts. And so the data snapshots that we show come from the formal research project, but our examples sort of are a mix mash between those sort of 3 places where guided drawing was implemented. We just sort of wanted to contextualize that work there. The formal research study is actually 2 studies that took place in 2 Head Start classrooms. Our participants were multilingual preschoolers, and these were primarily English and Spanish speaking. Study 1 was a group of 4 boys from classroom A, and we conducted that in the fall. There were 5 children who participated from classroom B, and those 5 children in classroom B were a little bit older than the 4 boys in classroom A. Study 2 participants included more children. We expanded a little bit into 10 children, and these were just in classroom B. We ended up with full data sets from 13 children. We considered a full data set to be kids that had pre sort of intervention data and post data with a set of drawings, and that attended a certain number of guided drawing sessions in which we gathered discourse analysis and videos in the actual drawings for. The context for these guided drawing groups was an integrated science and literacy sort of unit of instruction that was delivered with 1 teacher, 1 assistant, and then the researcher in the classroom. We did pre-post assessments. We collected drawings and transcripts and documented interactions with videos to help us sort of make our notes become clear about what we were seeing. We met as a team and discussed what we were observing, and really focused in on vocabulary acquisition and conceptual understanding through the process. Our assessment, we had actually 4 kinds of assessment. There are only 3 pictured here. And below is a snapshot from the research study that was published in Ed Sciences. We were looking at all sort of components of oral language, receptive, expressive, and we did a procedural explanation and a labeling task, which was basically like a science diagram. So here are the parts of a butterfly. We would point to the antenna and say, can you label what part is this? And then point to the compound eye, and we'd say, what part is this? And so it was a verbal production, and we asked them to actually label the various parts. And I think that one is more closely in the middle image there. The 4 squares that you see on the left was our receptive measure. It was sort of designed after the Peabody Picture Vocabulary Test, where you present the kids with 4 images, 3 are foils and 1 is the target, and you say, show me, and then fill in the blank. So show me butterfly was the cue for this one. And if they pointed to it, it was scored as correct. The last image all the way on the right of the screen there is our explanation, our explanatory probe, where we were asking them to explain, in this example, the life cycle of the butterfly. We had a life cycle of the frog, so it was more process-oriented, and we don't have a max and minimum score for that, but the other 3 assessments, we have some information there about how many items were administered and what the max and min scores were there, just sort of set context. Sorry, I'm in a school building and that's the school bell. So in regards to our receptive vocabulary measure, again, this was like point to the fill in the blank insect or whatever we were studying. There are obviously some very prominent ceiling effects. Couple of the kids started out knowing all 5 of the items and they maintained that. But in general, we saw scores increasing from pre-test to post-test for all children whose scores were not already at the ceiling. The 10 children whose scores demonstrated no ceiling effect had a mean increase of 1.5 items from pre-test to post-test. This isn't a relatively short, so it is contained within a semester, usually within a couple of weeks of it seeing effects there in the receptive vocabulary. With their expressive vocabulary, where we asked them to say, what is this? And then showed them a picture. We note that there were no ceiling effects initially, which, according to what we know about how language develops, receptive precedes expressive, and so we weren't surprised to find that here. And because of that, there were no ceiling effects in the expressive vocabulary data, but we did see a mean increase of 1.0, a little more than 1 point more items scored correctly at the post-test. With a narrower standard deviation than was present on the expressive. So here you see the labeling task. We saw a mean increase of 3.54 more items. And, we did score more items in the post-test. So there's some of that happening here. But these bars really did go up, so they had more opportunities to label things in the post-test. We saw 3 key findings as we sort of got into analyzing our interactions with children and their produced drawings throughout the guided drawing experiences. We're going to unpack these as we go, but overall, the first theme was that we found new knowledge in the children's drawings. That their emerging knowledge was supported during the guided drawing interactions. If we really think about the multilingual classroom as a cultural phenomenon where social interactions are really supporting academic growth, of which language is one component, we found that these sort of systems that we developed for implementing guided drawing really were supporting children. And then the third theme was that there are mixed misconceptions that were revealed in children's drawings and in our conversations with them that we probably wouldn't have been aware of had we not investigated the topic through drawing. And all of this is important as we keep in mind what we know about cross-linguistic transfer and the mounting evidence that there is that supports the fact that what we learn in one language transfers to another. And so some of these studies here are demonstrating that it's not just English to Spanish, that this phenomenon is present in multiple languages, that what we know in one language is sort of feeding us into what the language builds language, I guess is what I want to say. And it crosses modalities. So what we learn orally crosses into our writing and in this case, our drawings. Is this still me, Christina, or is this you?
It's you.
Okay, thanks. So our first theme was that we saw children thinking about having new knowledge. In this example is from Jenny. She's a preschooler, and she was working on the concept that spiders have 2 body parts, which is actually conceptually very different than all other insects, which have 3 body parts. And so part of the drawing prompt was 1 circle and then another. And she was producing those verbal scaffolds as she was drawing this spider. Without saying, she wasn't verbally saying it. She was just drawing them, right? So it included this evidence that there was tacit knowledge of the key vocabulary, even though that verbal production wasn't there in the transcript. The teachers always prompted one circle and then another. And then we replaced those two definitions of circles with first the head and then the abdomen. And so circles were the concrete sort of anchor for those science terms, and the circles were relatable and present in the child's drawing, and that slowly allowed for head and abdomen to sort of anchor on to those points. Jenny's visual emphasis she was pointing to this drawing. And as she was pointing, she sort of noted the point where the two circles joined. And you can see that sort of where her marker overlapped the color. It included those two parts of the spider's body, a circle representing the head and a second circle. And so, you know, we see in this the verbal scaffolding from the teacher. They were scaffolding that drawing process, but did not yet present those targeted vocabulary. We also noted that there were some other components of the teacher sort of component, compound eyes, to see all around, legs, and there was a spider web, which were also components of the teacher modeling of a spider. Okay. Moving on to theme 2, the ways that teachers were able to support emerging knowledge. A key component of this theme is that the knowledge is presented in the drawing, resulting from a scaffolded conversation during a guided drawing session. So the teacher's repetition of that targeted vocabulary and explicit vocabulary and concept instruction during guided drawing provided opportunities to learn new concepts. So Carla was sitting at the guided drawing table and we were working on spiders, and she presented a completed drawing, and that was what was presented in blue. Right, yeah. Sorry, I'm looking at my notes to make sure that I get the story correct. She presented it, and the teacher very quickly did a quick count and reminded Carla, after she counted, that spiders have 8 legs, right? And so Carla added another leg there in the middle of the spider, and not on the side with all of the others that were presented there. In our third theme, children's misconceptions were revealed as the researcher examined children's completed drawings and reflected on their possible sources of misunderstanding. So during a guided drawing session that focused on the life cycle of the butterfly, Stephanie proudly declared, "The caterpillar, she's sitting on them. These are her babies," and she pointed to all of the circles. The research team concluded that the babies below the caterpillar suggested the child was likely drawing on her understandings of chickens and eggs rather than on information on the life cycle of butterflies. And so this key concept that some creatures who have eggs don't actually sit on and raise their babies, it was some explicit teaching that we needed to sort of address through direct observation, but also through additional experiences with read-alouds and storybooks and media that was brought in to help sort of guide those misunderstandings. And then, so in all, I think this is you, Christina,
this is
correct?
Me.
Yeah.
I was just going to note the issue of raising babies and eggs, sitting on eggs, comes up a lot in the misconceptions. You'll see, we have another example coming, but that was definitely one of the misconceptions we saw quite a bit of. And also, if you go back to Carla, you see the multiple eyes that she drew, because spiders can have many eyes. So she did add that in as well, which I thought was interesting, that she had the multiple eyes, but then the leg was sort of adrift in the middle of the spider. Okay, so when we learned from guided drawing interactions, we had a number of instructional moves that we're going to ask you in the to to reflect on what you see in play as you look at some of our subsequent examples. So the guided drawing instructional moves to consider include reinforcing and extending knowledge, scaffolding drawing, probing and supporting children's thinking, using content-rich explanations, clarifying misunderstandings, provide opportunities to share learning and learn from others, and encouragement and wait time. Katie, how do you want to do this? We have a small group.
Yeah, I am trying to type. I can't copy paste while I'm sharing my screen, and I didn't anticipate that. So I'm almost through typing what those are into the chat, and I'm going to drop them in there.
Okay.
Misunderstandings. And
I'll let you monitor the chat in the upcoming. So
yep.
What we're going to do is we show you an example. We're going to ask you to think about which of these instructional moves you see in play and to just kind of type them or some other thinking about what you see happening into the chat. Okay. And then we'll talk more about it during the Q&A time.
Yep.
Okay. So everyone has them there.
Choices. Okay.
Got them all?
Yep, got them all.
All right. So the first one is Gracie. She's a kindergartner. She showed her drawing, pointed to the largest frog, and declared, "The mama is waiting for her eggs to hatch." And so in my interactions with Gracie, I reminded her of previous discussions and some video examples we had looked at, reminding her that unlike humans, elephants, or dogs, frog moms do not remain with their young. Gracie was insistent. She acknowledged, yep, okay, well, sometimes she leaves. And then she sort of sat for a moment and says, but she always comes back. Mamas always come back. You can see in the drawing that frogs do. The difference between frog eggs and toad eggs is frogs lay their eggs in clusters. Toads lay their eggs in a line, so you can see some evidence of that. But which of those guided drawing interactions do you see in play with this interaction with Gracie?
So if you could use the chat and type in, I put the choices in the chat and sort of left those there. So we want you to think about, are you seeing evidence that they're reinforcing and extending knowledge? Are you seeing evidence that the teacher is scaffolding drawing? Are you seeing evidence that there's probing and supporting of thinking? Are there content-rich explanations in this example? Has there been a clarification of misunderstandings, or were there opportunities to share and learn from others, or any encouragement in wait time? So we can use the chat, or if somebody has a thought about what they think they might be seeing in this example, we invite you to go ahead and unmute and share what you're thinking.
Maybe I'll jump in with just an oral contribution here. So I would say from the teacher's perspective, encouragement and wait time. So giving Gracie the opportunity to just kind of think about, when it says, but after a pause, asserted. So instead of jumping in, clarifying, she gave the child opportunity to reflect and further clarify her thought process.
That's a great point, because it's easy to just be like, great, I got the right answer and move on. But instead, that pause allowed, again, for more information to be revealed that we wouldn't have had without the wait time.
So Christina, in the chat, most people are suggesting it's a clarification of misunderstandings, in that it's a misapplication perhaps of her prior knowledge, and reminding of previous discussions could be an encouragement to reflect on the concept.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And we, it's not unusual for preschoolers and kindergartners to hear, Mama always comes back, but also the book, The Kissing Hand, had been read a couple of times in that classroom. And that's a theme that emerges from that book. So that that prior knowledge, trying to get us, we don't always know the source of children's misunderstandings, but trying to reflect on oh, I know what you're thinking because in the book or because of this experience, and then trying to use that as a springboard to clarifying their misunderstanding.
Yeah.
Great.
Yep. So then moving on, we have Felix. Do you want to do it set up first before I press the play button, Christina?
Yeah. So there's a video. We'll listen to it 2 times just because it does move really quickly, but it's also transcribed for you. And I can tell you, one of the things you'll hear is the chatter of other children. There's multiple conversations going on at once. And then this 3-year-old for the first time uses the word thorax. And I just was like, what? And thank goodness I was so thrilled that the video happened to be going. And so, think about, again, those instructional moves as you listen to Felix talk about his drawing.
Help me.
I can help you.
All right. What happened to your other dragon?
Oh, no. No. Huh. Perfect.
Did it pause on you?
Yeah, it did, and it's not playing.
Okay.
I can't even let me advance the slide and then come back and see if we can.
Help me.
I can help you.
All right. What happened to your other
You
dragonfly?
did make it.
Yes, a thorax.
Yeah, it's a thorax right there in the middle. Yep.
Never see me. It's a small one.
Yeah.
Me
And then the abdomen at the bottom. Very
this
good.
one.
Great. We'll play again, Katie.
Yeah, it will.
Help me.
I can help you.
All right.
What
happened to your other dragonfly?
You did make it.
Yes, a thorax.
Yeah, it's a thorax right there in the middle. Yep.
Never see me. It's a small one.
Yeah.
Me
And then the abdomen at the bottom. Very good.
One.
Thank you. It's important to note this is the youngest child in the study. And so, hearing him use that content-specific vocabulary and then also trying to go through this 3 steps was part of really one of the most exciting parts of the early phases of the work. So again, we invite you to think about, referring back to those instructional strategies and moves. What's happening here? And again, please feel free to come off mute and talk a little bit about it if you'd like.
We're implementing a good old Mr. Rogers, wait time,
Yes.
quiet minute here.
And then choices, if you scroll up, again, reinforce and extend existing knowledge, scaffolding drawing, probing and supporting thinking, clarifying misunderstandings, providing opportunities to share learning and learn from others, and encouragement and wait time. Definitely scaffolding the drawing. Yeah. A lot of, encouragement, sharing the learning, verbal scaffolds, and so on. Great.
Yeah. Probing and supporting thinking. Yes. One of the things that strikes me particularly about this interaction with Felix is his excitement to share his knowledge with the researcher, who in this instance happened to be Christina. You can just hear it, he has a thorax. And, you know, in this example, that sharing happened to be with the teacher, but we were finding peer-to-peer excitement for sharing as well, and peer-to-peer like supporting of thinking as they sort of got deeper into this guided drawing interaction process.
Okay, do you want to go to the next one?
Yes, sure.
Okay, so this one has the full transcript, and we won't read you the full transcript, but what was happening was during the drawing with Raphael, it started with me asking him, you know, do you want to draw with me? And he said no. And, you know, and you could tell with that real reluctance to try and represent something we had been learning about on paper, he's like, was evident. And then I took out a big whiteboard and we said, okay, let's draw together. And in this classroom, we had been planting bulbs, onion bulbs and tulip bulbs in clear plastic cups and watching them sprout. And so I was working with Raphael to draw the sprouting process. And so I start with drawing a line and I plant my bulb in the soil. And he draws a line and plants his bulb in the soil. And then we add roots because roots will help the bulb stay put and not blow away. And he draws roots as well. And then we move through drawing the shoot that goes up, 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 and adding some leaves and so on. And so all throughout this process, Raphael's like, I did it. And so there's lots of celebrating. Yes, you did it. And then on to the next part. But as we get to the end of the drawing, I add some leaves to mine. He adds leaves. He picks up a stencil to add the flower top, and then draws that in red. What he says is a rock. And I'm like, oh, you're right. There will be rocks in the soil or the dirt. And then he says, and roots, and adds roots to the rock. And there's this moment where it's like this child was so reluctant and is finally fully engaged. And there's that decision of like, do I let this go? But part of the commitment to guided drawing is the commitment to scientific accuracy. And so I take a moment and I say, oh, are you drawing roots on your rocks? And, you know, rocks don't have roots because they're not alive. And there's a brief explanation and he points to it and he goes, that's a bulb. So he changed it from a rock with roots to a bulb to be consistent with the explanation. And then you see a friend came over and said, I like your drawing, Rafa. And he proceeds to explain what he was drawing to his friend there. So do we want to do one more and just think about what's happening in this interaction?
This is one of my most favorite interactions that we have documented in the whole book, for the record.
I think in the early presentations too, right? This was the full example that we brought out and we're getting feedback about our elicitation techniques. And it's feedback from other researchers and the responses of the children that started to make us realize we were onto something. Thank you. Lorraine reposted the choices. Absolutely.
There's some clarification of understanding for sure.
Hey, did you want to hit the space bar? I think there's another line will show up at the bottom, won't it?
In the presentation?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, lots of content-rich explanations, lots of clarifying. One of the reason this is one of our favorite examples because it has all of it. Mm-hmm. Yep. Great.
Yeah, that observation from Susan about using the whiteboard and that being a safe place. Sometimes a temporary mark feels more comfortable than a permanent one, right? Mm-hmm. For kids to invite them in, and that scaffold of the The flower is a complex sort of thing that we found that many kids were reluctant to engage in exploring through their drawings. And so that scaffold that we provided for a very short while before they got the hang of it invited them and like sort of calmed some of their fears of like, oh, I'm not going to be able to get this right
Mhm. And what was
throughout that
interesting,
process.
we would take the whiteboard to the photocopier. If they ended up satisfied with their drawing, then I would take it to the photocopier and make a copy, which it took a while to help them understand why it wasn't in color. But it was a way of helping them, take some risks on a whiteboard, but then getting the permanent drawing to take home or to share with others. Great. Do you want to go to the next one?
Sure.
Just explain this one.
Sure, absolutely. One of the more rewarding things about we knew what we were doing when we like sort of were highlighting all the vocabulary words, but in the publication process for the book, the typesetting and the editing, we had to figure out a way to sort of signal to our readers like these were vocabulary words. And so the process of going through and highlighting all of the vocabulary words that were like intentionally integrated was a really rewarding experience, at least for me, as somebody who was involved in like the reflection of like, wow, we really did have a powerful impact here. Look what we did.
This one was a lot of fun, and luckily Felix did us a big favor by using 2 different colors, or we might have missed this one. So I was working with Pilar in a guided drawing session after a focal lesson on insects' 3 body parts, and I had reminded Pilar that insects have 6 legs. Now, Felix wasn't sitting with me. He was a couple of seats down, and he was coloring the face of his insect, his ant, and he stopped coloring, counted the legs, and added 2 more in red, because of the overhearing of the guided drawing lesson. So he wasn't even directly involved in the interaction, but was benefiting from it. And you can see all around he was practicing the head, thorax, abdomen, the 3 body parts as he was drawing other ants along with the ant who's featured in the drawing.
So as we were engaging in this, we saw plenty of evidence to suggest that this instructional context was a place where we could sustain cultural and linguistic sort of frames of thinking and language. Kids oftentimes integrated their home language. There was lots of translanguaging from the kids at various stages of English language development. And we honored those and built upon their prior language as a foundation to build on. It provided so many opportunities for the kids to think as readers and artists and thinkers. And because we were sort of doing a hands-on sort of integrative approach where we were reading books and watching multimedia and drawing and talking, we really got them to tap into all of their domains of language. They were listening and speaking and reading, and some of them started to label, but we consider drawing as part of writing, right? And so one boy like proclaimed as he sat down at the guided drawing table, "Voy a dibujar una bumblebee." And he didn't know how to say "I'm going to draw" in English, but he did know the word bumblebee because it was a word that we had been working on and studying. And so he put that one in there in English. And there were so many examples of that. So, we had a lot of takeaways. We think that this sort of intervention functioned as a bridge between research and practice that allowed us a way into these complex contexts, teaching and learning that are early childhood in ways that allowed us to support vocabulary, concept development, and their identities as multilingual learners. The drawings and the talk amongst children and teachers offer a rich body of evidence of learning and helped us identify what the various individual children needed as a next step to grow their vocabulary and concept knowledge. We found as we implemented this approach and the teachers that collaborated with us shared feedback that they found the guided drawing approach to be adaptable across topics and even age groups. We worked all the way up. I worked with some first graders last year in my current context with this approach as well. So we've done preschool and kindergarten and first grade, and I'm going to try it out with my other couple of newcomers that I have this year. So I think this is where we go to Q&A. And, you know, we have some thinking questions for you, but we're really open to any other sort of questions or comments that you all have right now. So if anybody has a question or a comment,